Why LNG is central to the future expansion of India-Qatar trade. The recent state visit of Qatar's Amir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani saw New Delhi and Doha setting a target to double bilateral trade to announce $28 billion a year by 2030. Apart from elevating the bilateral relationship to a strategic partnership, according to Ministry of External Affairs, trade, investment and energy were among the major topics discussed between Prime Minister Modi and Al Thani. The India-Qatar trade relationship has predominantly been fueled by New Delhi's heavy imports of liquefied natural gas, of which Doha is the largest supplier. With the two countries now aiming to double bilateral trade over the next 5 years, LNG or superchilled gas is likely to play a pivotal role in the endeavor as well. The reason India's LNG imports are expected to surge over the next 5 years as the country's natural gas consumption is set to grow significantly. The expected growth in imports would coincide with Qatar's expanding its LNG export capacity. In fact, Qatar and the US are two key geographies that are likely to see notable expansion in the LNG export capacity over the coming years. And Indian oil and gas companies are understood to be eyeing both countries to meet the incremental gas demand. Even as India hopes to increase export to Qatar and attract investments, it is a fact that balance of trade between the two countries is heavily skewed in Qatar's favor. LNG imports account for 50% of India's overall imports from Qatar, which totaled $11 billion in the first 11 months of 2024. Other major imports were also fossil fuel linked commodities and products like liquefied petroleum gas, crude oil, plastics, and other petrochemicals. By contrast, India's exports to Qatar during that period totaled $1.61 billion. In January to November 24, India imported 9 billion tons of LNG from Qatar, of which accounted 38.8% of India's overall LNG imports by volume. In value terms, India's LNG imports from Qatar were $5.75 billion, accounting for 41.2% of its total LNG imports. India's largest LNG importer, Petronet LNG, has a long-term contract with Qatar for 7.5 million tons per annum of LNG, which were extended to 2048 last year. Apart from this, Qatar also holds a sizable share in India's LNG purchases from the spot market. In December, public sector major GAIL inked a 5-year contract with Qatar Energy for additional imports. The Indian government has set an ambitious target to increase the share of natural gas in the country's primary energy mix to 15% by 2030, from little over 6% at present. This will boost LNG imports even further, with the domestic market gas being able to meet just about half the country's demand at the moment. According to Paris-based International Energy Agency, the natural gas consumption is seen rising nearly 60% over the 23 levels to 103 billion cubic meters by 2030, while LNG imports are said to more than double between 2023 and 2030 by 65 BCM a year, driven by steady demand growth and a much slower rise in domestic production. Between 2013 and 2023, India's LNG imports increased by 70% and reached 36 BCM in 2024. According to Paris-based International Energy Agency, India's natural gas consumption is seen rising nearly 60% over 23 levels to 103 billion cubic meters by 2030. While LNG imports are said to more than double between 2023 and 2030 to 65 BCM a year, driven by steady demand growth and a much slower rise in domestic production. Between 2013 and 2023, India LNG imports increased by 70% and reached 36 BCM in 2024, matching the previous record set in 2020 and cementing the country's position as the fourth largest LNG importer globally. No wonder that India's oil and gas companies are scouting for LNG supply contracts globally. Just last week, Indian oil and gas companies inked three long-term LNG import deals worth billions of dollars with global majors. The deals included long-term contracts by public sector refiners, Indian Oil Corporation and Bharat Petroleum Corporation with the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company and the Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation deal with French company Total Engines. At the same time, Qatar will significantly add to its LNG export capacity. The Gulf country's liquefaction capacity is set to nearly double to 142 million ton per annum by 2027 to 77 million ton per annum metric ton per annum. Over the coming years, the US is expected to be Qatar's biggest competitor for supplying LNG to India. The US is currently India's second largest source of superchill gas. In January November 24, India imported 5.12 million tons of LNG from the US, accounting 20.2% of the former's cumulative LNG imports. It was valued at $2.5 billion. From Qatar, it $11.49 billion. New Delhi and Washington have agreed to make steps toward making Washington a leading supplier of oil and gas to India, which could help bridge the trade deficit between the two countries. US President Donald Trump had said after meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Washington, D.C. last week. Trump also lifted the Joe Biden administration's ban on export permits for new LNG projects, which could further solidify the United States' position as the world's largest LNG exporter. It is no surprise then that in their hunt for more long-term LNG contracts, Indian oil and gas companies are keenly eyeing opportunities in the US. Indian companies are looking at buying LNG from around the world, including particularly from the US. Petroleum Secretary Pankaj Jain told the reporters just days before the PM's visit. How the government spent. The RBI has used data since the 1991 to create Quality of Public Expenditure Index, which assesses how well the government is spending public money. The latest report makes for a positive picture. The latest monthly bulletin by the RBI released on Wednesday carries a study that looks at how well did Indian government, both center and state, spend their money over the past 2 decades. Public discourse in India has seen two standout trends: push for fiscal push for fiscal rectitude. That is, the government should try to live within its means. To this end, India instituted the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act in 2003. FRBM stated two things. First, the India's fiscal deficit should not exceed 3% of the GDP. In other words, the money that government could borrow to meet the gap between its income and expenditure should be limited to 3% of the economy. Second, the gap between everyday income and expenditure of the government should be zero. The revenue deficit should be zero. The revenue deficit should be zero. The whole idea behind these two requirements was that government should only borrow for capital expenditure and not for things like paying higher salaries. Push for higher capital expenditure Capex is the kind of expenditure that boosts the productive capacity of an economy. As such, paying salaries is revenue or current expenditure, while building a road is capex. There has been a growing realization that India needs to boost of its physical infrastructure in order to be able to grow fast. There has been a growing realization that India needs to boost its physical infrastructure in order to be able to grow fast. The whole point of these two trends is to improve the quality of public expenditure, which would result in better outcomes for citizens in terms of both economic growth and social metrics such as health and education. However, over the past 2 decades, India has also faced several crises such as global financial crisis of 2008 and the technical recession during the COVID-induced lockdowns of 2020. Add to that the increasing tendency among politicians to either waive loans or provide more handouts of and freebies. All of these militate against the quality of public expenditure. Capex is kind of expenditure that boosts the productive capacity of the economy. As such, paying salaries is revenue or current expenditure, while building a road is capex. There has been growing realization that India needs to boost its public physical infrastructure in order to be able to grow fast. The whole point of these trends is to improve the quality of public expenditure, which would result in better outcomes for citizens in terms of both economic growth and social metrics such as health and education. However, over the past 2 decades, India has also faced several crises such as global financial crisis of 2008 and technical recession during the COVID-induced lockdowns of 2020. Add to that the increasing tendency among politicians to either waive loans or provide more handouts and freebies. All of these militate against the quality of public expenditure. Any one variable, say fiscal deficit or capital expenditure, will never be able to capture the full story about quality of public expenditure. The RBI has thus used data since 1991 to create the Quality of Public Expenditure Index. This index is based on five variables: capital outlay to GDP ratio, the money set aside by governments towards building physical infrastructure expressed as a percentage of GDP. The higher the ratio, the better the quality of public expenditure. Revenue expenditure to capital outlay ratio. This captures the relative weight of the two kinds of expenditure. The lower the value of this ratio, the better the quality of public expenditure. Development expenditure to GDP ratio. Development expenditure is a broad term that refers to all public expenditure that is intended to stimulate economic growth by enhancing the economy's stock of production factors, labor, and capital, or by improving their productivity. The most frequently cited categories include education and training, public infrastructure investments, R&D, and healthcare. In some cases, even subsidies, particularly those aimed at improving nutrition, such as food subsidies, are also considered part of development expenditure as they bring long term welfare gains. Development expenditure measured as a percentage of government's total expenditure. The higher the value of this ratio, the better. Interest payments to total government expenditure ratio. Interest payments pile up if governments run up high deficits in the preceding years. A lower value of this ratio thus shows better quality of public spending. Interest payments to total government expenditure ratio. Interest payments pile up if governments run up to high deficits in the preceding years. A lower value of this ratio thus shows better quality of public spending. In charts 1 and 2, the RBI captures the net effect of all these factors on quality of public spending since the economic reforms in India. The RBI has broken the whole period in 6 phases and stated how structural forces have shaped the quality of public expenditure. In phase 1, the center's index slowed slight improvement while states index declined modestly. These movements were driven by the fiscal pressures faced at both levels of the government. Public investment fell as fiscal consolidation took precedence. In phase two, both indices experienced sharp decline, reflecting the combined impact of Fifth Pay Commission implementation, rising interest payments, and persistent dominance of revenue expenditure over capital outlay. Phase 3 shows positive effects of the both fiscal discipline. FRBM started guiding government borrowing and fast economic growth, making more money available for spending. States also benefited from higher fiscal devolution, read higher share in taxes. The index rebound sharply until the world is hit by global financial crisis of 2008. In Phase 4, 2008 crisis prompted the center to adopt a counter-cyclical fiscal policy fiscal measures, including stimulus packages. In other words, the government, especially the center, has to spend more in order to counter the slowdown and hurt caused by the crisis. While this continued to push up the index during this phase, higher spending levels resulted in higher deficits and eventually started eroding the quality of public expenditure. Phase 5 saw the trajectory of the index go in opposite direction. For the center and the states, the QPE saw an improvement in the states with improvements in development spending as well as more money being available to them, thanks to the recommendations of the 14th Finance Commission. The center faced challenges with GST revenues sharing initially favoring the states. Phase 6 marked by another crisis, COVID pandemic, and another bump of the fiscal stimulus. However, economic recovery, especially by the heightened focus on capital expenditure, helped push up the quality of public expenditure. As things stand, according to RBI's index, the quality of public expenditure in India, both at center and state levels, is close to the highest point they have ever been since the beginning of economic liberalization in 1991. How Amazon got creative control over James Bond films, what this means. Spice, Speed and Sex, James Bond film franchise has always continued the elements needed to create a blockbuster entertainment, but more than just being money spinners, the films have created an iconic character in popular culture, one of suave, seductive British spy who has been both emulated and parodied globally. Now, for the first time since the release of the first Bond film in 1962, the series' creative direction is set to change hands. E-commerce giant Amazon will take over creative control from the Broccoli family, which has held production rights and acted as caretakers of the C007's legacy since the film's inception. A deal announced on Thursday is expected to be closed this year. Among the world's best known film franchises, this is how Bond achieved its fame status and what the deal could mean. The films are based on English writer Ian Fleming's series of spy novels inspired by his time working in the British Naval Intelligence. An instant hint, Bond soon attracted producers' interest. Fleming's debut novel, Casino Royale, was published in 1952, and within a decade, producers Albert R. Cubby, Broccoli, and Harry Saltzman brought Bond to the big screen with Dr. No. This was when the world first heard the legendary line Bond James Bond from the actor Sean Connery, the first person to play Bond. The film created unique and lasting villain characters. Can ex gratia be paid in cash? Here's what the rules say. Following the stampede at the New Delhi railway station, the railway ministry disbursed in cash an ex gratia sum of 10 lakh to the next of kin. of the 18 deceased in the tragedy, it handed over bundles of 50 and 100 notes after verifying the recipient's Aadhaar details. Ex gratia is Latin for by favor. Such payments are made out of moral, not legal obligation. These are gestures of goodwill, but one that do not involve admitting any liability or wrongdoing. Compensations, on the other hand, are made out of legal obligation. They are reparatory payments that are meant to reimburse or make amends for the loss of life, property, livelihood, etc. While disbursal of ex gratia payment in cash is not common, there are not strict overarching guidelines. However, 2023 communication by Railway Board stipulated that maximum amount of 50,000 is to be paid in cash as an immediate relief for taking care of the initial expenses. The remaining would be paid by account payee, check, RTGS, any other online mode. The Great Tech Rush, AI India. With recent arrival of DeepSeek settings of AI ambitions in India, including audacious bid to develop its own large language model with Hatari Rao, Alin Chauhan, and Amitabh Sinha, meet some of the top AI researchers as they map the country's road to a seat at the high technology's high table. AI is probably the most important thing that humanity has ever worked on. I think of it as something more profound that electricity of fire, said Sundar Pichai, Google CEO at the World Economic Forum in 2018. Pichai was not indulging in a hyperbole. As the head of the leading technology company, he knew something that others probably did not, that the enduring quest for making intelligent machines has crossed critical hurdles and about to enter a revolutionary phase. Over the last couple of years, the emergence of AI powered tools such as ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, Grok, and many more, all examples of what are known as large language models, have given people a glimpse into the possibilities that AI has always believed to have. These LLMs have shown an exceptional proficiency to understand and interact with human languages in a meaningful way, considered an extremely difficult task for computers. Language proficiency is just one capability. There are other fields in which AI is making profound difference. For example, AI-based tool AlphaFold has shown such remarkable ability in predicting protein structure. A notoriously difficult job otherwise, but critically important for understanding life processes, that its developers Demis Hassabis and John Jumper won a Nobel Prize in Chemistry last year. Demis, Demis Hassabis and John Jumper, Hassabis and Jumper. Such major breakthroughs have resulted in a huge excitement around AI and some concerns too. AI will start controlling weapons and will become mission critical technology like nuclear technology at a national security level. This means that AI will be able to used for cyber counterterrorism, nuclear weapon designing and running robots which will be fighting wars of the next decade, said Gautam Shroff, professor in Indraprasth Institute of Information Technology, Delhi, and former vice president of head of research at TCS. AI is currently one of the most coveted technologies. The recent release of the DeepSeek, a Chinese LLM built at a fraction of cost of its American rivals whose domination of technology has remained unchallenged till then was described by many as a Sputnik moment. The beginning of a new age of technology was reminiscent of the space wars between US and the USSR in the 1960s and the 70s. For India, where work on AI is a relatively nascent stage, DeepSeek was a wake-up call that ignited fears of being left out in technology race once again. Just last year, India had launched a 10,000 crore missions to build capabilities in AI, with DeepSeek busting the myth that cutting edge AI technology can only be developed by the richest companies in the world. India felt compelled to reassess its timelines. IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw announced that India would have its own LLM within 10 months. The Indian Express on Friday reported that the center has received at least 67 proposals to build India-specific models. Though it is the current flavor of season, LLMs that take the text inputs and generate synthesized outputs in the form of text, image, or code are not the be all and end all of AI. They are just small part of the ultimate ambition to design a fully intelligent machine that scientists have long envisioned. The kind that can think and act autonomously through the process of self learning artificial intelligence. The kind that can think and act autonomously through the process of self-learning or artificial general intelligence. Since the beginning of the computer age in the 1940s, scientists have wondered whether computers, when given more processing power, would be able to perform every task that a human can. In other words, can the human become an intelligent, if not sentient being? Many scientists, including mathematician Alan Turing, considered the father of modern computing, were of the opinion that computers would eventually gain so much sophistication that they would be able to think and act independently like human brains. Others, like whom Nobel Prize winning physicist and mathematician Roger Penrose, had been skeptical of the idea that computers could eventually become more powerful than human brains. Scientists have long been trying to make computers mimic the human brain. Over the years, they have succeeded in developing algorithms known as artificial neural networks that are inspired by the structure and workings of the human brains and have the capabilities to identify and learn patterns in data. Breakthroughs in these kinds of neural networks have enabled the development of LLMs and tools like AlphaFold. The systems still do not think and act like human brains, but are able to deliver results that make it appear than than they are able to doing something similar. As of now, LLMs seem to be frontier of AI technology. They belong to be a broader category of AI systems called foundational models. These are general purpose AI terms systems over which numerous specific applications can be built. They are As of now, LLMs seem to be at the frontier of AI technology. They belong to a broader category of AI systems called foundational models. They are general purpose AI systems over which numerous specific applications can be built. They are general purpose AI application. They are general purpose AI systems. They are general purpose AI systems over which numerous specific applications can be built. They are trained on a very large data sets and form the backbone of applications that users interact with. They are trained on a very large dataset and form the backbone of the large applications that users interact with. LLMs are the good examples of foundational models that they can handle language related tasks, engage in a conversation, summarize large text, prepare notes, write computer programs, or even generate poems on demand. There are other foundational models that work with images, audio, or video. On the other hand, the Deep Blue computer that defeated Gary Kasparov in a famous man versus machine match in '97 could only play chess and was not a foundational model in that sense. Currently, these models also serve as the base for applications that are used to predicting complex protein structure, design vaccines, weather forecasting, and computer coding, among other things. There were two things that were easy for humans but extremely difficult for computers to do: vision and language. We have largely solved the vision problem. Computer vision has become extremely sophisticated now and is getting better. Face detection, medical imaging, satellite based observations. With LLMs, we have cracked the second problem of language understanding, as the current generative AI tools, AI that generates content, as these current generative AI tools have shown. Of course, there much more has to happen here, but key breakthroughs have been made. The third frontier, where machines are still not doing that great, is the area of more abstract reasoning. Simple things like A implies B, B implies C, then it should imply something something. That kind of stuff. It seems pretty straightforward for humans, but it is very difficult for a computer, said B. Ramendran, head Department of Data Science and AI, IIT Madras. He also heads the IIT's Wadhwani School and Robert Bosch Center and Center for Responsible AI. For now, the big race among nations and corporations is to develop their own foundational models, as building applications on top of someone else's model can bring in layers of vulnerabilities. For example, models trained on global datasets can lack nuances and insert foreign biases, thereby producing unwanted or extraneous results. In applications related to defense or national security, a foreign model always carries potential dangers of sabotage, leaks of sensitive information data, and uncertainty about updates. On the other hand, homegrown models can spur innovation across sectors and can result in the establishment of an AI ecosystem. It is like having our own space program. Not all countries have it. We can possibly piggyback on the US or Europe or someone else, but then we will also have to remain dependent on them. For the same reason, we have to have AI infrastructure if we aspire to be a major power in the world. It is like having our own space program. Not all countries have it. We can possibly piggyback on the US or Europe or someone else, but we will also have to remain dependent on them. There is a lot interesting work in AI happening in India, but these mostly relate to building AI based applications for specific work in healthcare or drug discovery. Building foundational models has not been a priority, mainly because it is an extremely resource heavy and expensive exercise. It involves massive computational infrastructure enabled through specifically designed state of the art chips, GPUs. Building foundational models requires massive computational infrastructure enabled through specifically designed state-of-the-art chip called GPUs that were once used primarily for gaming. A model architecture has to be designed and built and then trained on a very large data sets for it to learn to do a variety of things. Training model is a process that consumes an enormous amount of electricity as well. LLMs like GPT-3 devoured nearly 1300 megawatt hours of power. GPT-3 devoured nearly 1300 megawatt hour of power, and these thousands of GPUs often run in hyperscale data centers which can be as big as 1 billion square feet. Any form of big impact research in science requires substantial long-term funding, especially of blue sky, curiosity-driven research. If support from government, industry, or both is available, I don't see why technologies like the LLMs can be developed in India. In practice, there is probably plenty of useful AI research that can be done in Indian universities without an indigenous LLM. But for reasons of sovereignty and national security, countries including India will probably invest in AI technologies that are homegrown. The AI mission is a good beginning in this regard, says Mayank Vatsa, Professor Computer Science, IIT Jodhpur. The government's AI mission has undoubtedly sparked off important discussions about enhancing research infrastructure, training advanced deep learning models for a large scale application demands substantial GPU clusters and high performance computing facilities. While some premier institutes such as the IITs and the National Research Labs have built up some capacities, their scale remains modest compared to global benchmarks. The absence of a robust, dedicated HPC framework for AI research, especially for large-scale experiment, continues to be a major bottleneck. Shortage of GPUs currently in high demand and short supply is a big challenge. While the AI mission seeks to procure at least 10,000 of the GPU chips, some researchers feel that lack of expertise to run these clusters. In 2017, I was on the first AI task force. We had recommended that India should create a centralized AI infrastructure, allocate about 5,000 crore in the next few years, including on procuring GPUs, and let the research community use this. We had three committees, but nothing much happened. Straight Shroff, IIIT Delhi. OpenAI was just beginning, then ChatGPT 2 was out and GPT 3 was in the pipeline. We knew the direction in which things were moving. Back then, no one was sure that this language thing, LLMs, would work. Even OpenAI was unsure, but they went ahead. If we had started acting in 2017, we would also have been in the lead. Now we have to spend much more in buying GPUs in a GPU so scarce market. Now we have to spend much more in buying GPUs in a GPU scarce market. Why we have to always play catch up? You have to trust your scientists to do the right thing. You set up a committee in 2017 but then didn't act on its recommendations. India might be late, but it is not completely out of race. As Ravindran of IIT Madras points out, there are plenty of new and innovative things India can do to join the leaders. This is particularly true for data. None of the models in the market right now are trained on Indian datasets. We have our own peculiarities and nuances. There are thousands of languages and dialects, each with its own finer details, and most of us speak multiple languages and mix up their words and while speaking or writing. These are unique traits which no model captures. We have to create our own datasets quickly, and some work in this regard has been happening. We then need not build our own model from scratch. There are lots of open source models like Llama or Mistral that are available in the public domain. These can be tweaked to our requirements and then trained on Indian datasets. It would be as good as a homegrown model. Richa Singh, head of Department of Computer Science and Engineering, IIT Jodhpur, agrees, saying that India's linguistic diversity was both an opportunity and a challenge. We need to build large language diverse datasets in multiple Indian languages, not just for common tasks like communication, but also for specialized domains like healthcare, agriculture, and law. Developing advanced multimodal AI systems can effectively handle the complexities of Indian languages can give us unique advantage. It is also important to secure Indian data sets and not allow its leakage, says Chetan Arora, Professor Computer Science. Let's say company A goes to the government and says it will help fulfill a task free of charge but will collect the data. Although the government has got the service free of charge, the data is gone, in this case too cheaply. You cannot keep giving data to the multinationals as it is a strategic asset and advantage now. Let's say company A goes to the government and says it will fulfill a task free of charge but will collect the data. It is also important to secure Indian data sets and not allow its leakage. A unique feature of India's AI research ecosystem is that it is entirely driven by government institutions and laboratories. There is little initiative or participation of the large IT companies, which are some of the big names in the international software service industry. This is very unlike the other countries where AI research has been spearheaded by private corporations, whether in the United States, China, or Europe. Indian industry is seen as extremely risk averse with little expenditure on research and innovation. Private companies do not have the muscle, frankly. TCS has the biggest research lab. Among private companies in India, we had about 700 people just in India when I was there, all researchers, but still the hardware investments were minuscule compared even to the many customers of the TCS. Despite these challenges, most agree that it's key that India powers through. It is one of those rare instances where India is throwing its hat to participate in the development of a cutting edge technology instead of just hoping for an early adoption. How it performs in this race will have implication not just on its capabilities in AI but also on its economic growth and aspirations for the seat at the global high table. Foundational models, general-purpose AI systems for which numerous specific applications can be built. They are trained on very large datasets and form the backbone of applications that users interact with. Large language models, they are an example of foundational models. They can handle a wide range of language related tasks. GPUs, they are specifically designed computer chips used to train foundational models, algorithms that are inspired by the structure and workings of the human brains and have the ability to identify and learn patterns in data, a technique that uses artificial intelligence neural networks to learn from data. Rise and Rise of Tulsi Gabbard, the director of US National Intelligence, is a person of conviction, supporter of India. Donald Trump, no doubt, is the most powerful leader in the US, but who is second most powerful? It is Tulsi Gabbard, the enigmatic Hawaiian, a woman of color born to Samoan father and an Irish mother, the practicing Hindu and a serving lieutenant colonel in the US Army Reserve and a fiercely independent and opinionated leader. She heads the Directorate of National Intelligence, an umbrella organization of 18 intelligence agencies of the US government including the FBI and CIA. As the director of this coveted body, Gabbard is a gatekeeper at the White House and eyes and ears of the US president. The 43-year-old's meteoric rise in the US politics is fascinating. She got into politics in the state of Hawaii. At just 20 years old, Gabbard rose to become Congresswoman in 2010 and continued for 8 years until she took the decision to quit and try her hand at the Democratic Party presidential primary debates in 2020. Her move was seen by many as premature and ambitious. She finally withdrew from the race, but not before ruffling many feathers in her party. Gabbard's greatest strength is a commitment to what she believes to be right, After September 11, 2001 attack, she became a bit critic of the Islamist terror and vowed to fight against it. This prompted her to volunteer for the Army Reserve in 2003, and she was in Iraq on active field service in 2005. She served in the US Army until 2009 and rose to become a lieutenant colonel, a rank that she still holds. It is interesting that while devotion to Krishna and Bhagavad Gita shaped her religious beliefs, something that she wears on her sleeve proudly, a failed job in the Middle East shaped her political views. Gabbard's tryst with Hinduism began when as a child she followed her parents to American disciple of a Srila Prabhupada, Chris Butler, who was running a yoga and meditation center. The entire family acquired a Hindu identity, with Tulsi's siblings adopting Hindu names like Jay, Narayan, Bhakti, and Vrindavan. Tulsi remains an ardent Krishna devotee. She became the first congressperson to take oath on the Bhagavad Gita. Gabbard carried copies of the Gita, a, considered a manual of righteous war, Dharma Yudh, to Iraq, but her views about the war landed her in several controversies as she developed an anti-war conviction in her years on the brutal battlefields of Iraq. She insisted that what the US was doing in the name of the war on terror was anything but righteous. Like Arjuna, she was rattled by the death and destructive caused to American lives and assets during the war on terror. She believed that dictators like Assad were actually protecting Syrians from terror groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda. Her criticism of the US's war activities earned the wrath of the Democratic colleagues, including President Barack Obama. However, the qualities endeared her to Donald Trump. Gabbard met Trump in 2017 when he became president and gradually moved closer to him. She formally left Democratic Party in 22 and endorsed Trump candidature in 23, for which she was richly rewarded. Gabbard's India connection has been a matter of debate. While many admired her for pro-Hindu and pro-India views, she faced criticism from the American liberals. Eyebrows were raised when she met Prime Minister Narendra Modi earlier this month in Washington, D.C. Since it is usual for DNI to meet a foreign dignitary alone, but Modi and Gabbard have known each other for at least a decade. Gabbard met Modi briefly for the first time when she visited New York for the UN General Assembly in 2014. A few months later, when she came to Delhi to address an India Foundation event, a longer meeting took place between the two, which cemented their acquaintance. They met on several occasions later, in early 2015, Gabbard married her longtime friend Abraham Williams in a traditional Hindu ceremony at Oahu in Hawaii. Having known her for some years, I attended the wedding. Carrying a gift message from Modi, the PM conveyed warm greetings on the joyous occasion, especially underscoring happiness over the decision to have nuptials according to the traditional Vedic ceremony. He added that India cannot be fathomed in one visit alone and invited Gawad to visit again. The Gabbard has been vocal supporter of India and Hindus and a votary of strong India ties. There is great excitement and opportunity that being felt on the ground of both US and India, and I think we are headed in the right direction. There's definitely some challenges that we'll have to overcome, but the intention and heart are moving in the right place. There is a great opportunity for both of us if in many areas from security to economy and many other things we can do together. Gabbard said delivering her address on the future of Indo-US relationships at the India Foundation event in 2015, she continues to hold that conviction to this day. Gabbard's unorthodox politics came under scrutiny during an hour-long confirmation hearing between the Senate Intelligence Committee when some members insinuated she has loyalties elsewhere. Those who oppose my nomination imply that I am loyal to something or someone other than God, my own conscience, and the Constitution of the United States. She shot back at the committee, dismissing the absurdity of accusing me of being a puppet of five different puppet masters at the same time: Trump's puppet, Putin's puppet, Assad, Guru's puppet, and Modi's puppet. Gabbard has been vocal critic of the deep state. Today she heads the alleged source of it, the DNI. It will be interesting to watch how she tames it. Delhi's new CM. This refers to the editorial capital calling the appointment of Rekha Gupta as the new CM marks a significant moment for the BJP, bringing fresh leadership and new hopes for the city. As the first time MLA and the member of the Sangh Parivar, Gupta's rise through the ranks demonstrates the BJP's inclination toward promoting new relatively junior leaders. Her challenge will undoubtedly to balance the complex political and governance demands of Delhi, managing the multi-layered power dynamics and diverse community interests with her party and city's governance structure. This refers to the editorial capital calling in the last decade the stress has been on welfareism, and within that freebies took the top spot. Essential services like pure drinking water, smooth roads, clean air, and contamination of the Yamuna could not attract required attention. Delhi is a kind of mini India with people from all states, all cultures, and different traditions, and their interests have to be protected, especially the marginalized, deprived. The demand for welfare programs in their constituency is prevalent among most constituencies. Lifeline of the city. This refers to the article, not just Saif's lifesaver in Malegaon, which is population of more than 7 lakh and lacks basic infrastructure. Autos are the lifeline in the city. In the recent Maharashtra Assembly election, independent candidate left no stone unturned to get the symbol of the auto rickshaw. Politicians, bureaucrats, and businessmen have also have their private autos for easy access to the narrow lanes for the city. This refers to the article Trumpism versus Collective West. US President Donald Trump's administration looked determined to take a complete different approach to resolving the Ukraine Russia crisis compared to his predecessor, Joe Biden. His upending of the US foreign policy has created fissures in the decades old friendly relations between the US and the EU. Only time will tell how Washington's decision to hold talks with Moscow and Riyadh without imagining Kiev shapes the future of Ukraine. But as British philosopher Russell said, war does not determine who is right, only who is left. Supreme Court's terms of relief of Ranveer Al-Habadia threaten liberty of citizen, freedom of press. The missing growth strategy. India's development challenge is to ensure that western and southern states aren't caught in the middle income trap and poor states grow rapidly. In 2007, India joined the ranks of the middle income countries classified to be precisely as a low middle income economy. Almost 18 years later, it remains in that category. Over these years, India's per capita income has risen from 1,000 to $2 to $2,700. Some have argued that if a country remains a lower middle income economy for 28 years, in India's case that would mean a decade more, then it is caught in a lower middle income trap. The per capita income now required to join the ranks of upper middle income countries is $4,516. Per capita income required to join the ranks of upper middle income countries $4,516. The IMF expects India's per capita income to touch $4,200 by 2029. There is, however, considerable variation across the country. For instance, the average income for western and southern states are far in excess of the rest of the country. Considering their growth trajectories, these states should graduate to upper middle income status over the coming years. Telangana, which has a per capita income of 4,300, will be probably the first to achieve the status, followed by Karnataka 4,000, Haryana 3,900, and Tamil Nadu 3,800. With an average income of 5,500, Delhi can already be classified as an upper middle income. The ruling dispensation has, however, set an ambitious task of becoming a high income developed country over the next 2 decades. This is challenging at many levels. For India to reach per capita income in excess of 10,000, the current growth structure necessarily requires western and southern states to have higher levels of per capita income, attaining higher income status years before. Put differently, these states will have to avoid middle income trap that has been bogged down by many countries. This is a tall order. Even China, after achieving spectacular growth of over several decades, is yet to join the ranks of high income economies. The ability or inability of these states to do so will perhaps become apparent by the middle of the next decade. States in this region are trying to engage in activities across the entire spectrum, from low cost skilled manufacturing to high end manufacturing and skilled services. These range from apparel to cars, from mobile phone assembly to semiconductor units, and from IT services to chip design. Both market forces and government policy exercised through PLIs are reinforcing the manufacturing and services ecosystem in these regions. Even in the primary sector, these states are more engaged in high value added activities like dairy and poultry. States For India to reach a per capita income in excess of 10,000, the current growth structure necessarily requires western and southern states to have higher levels of per capita income, attaining higher income status years before. Put differently, these states will have to avoid the middle income trap that has bogged down many countries. This is a tall order. Even China, after achieving spectacular growth for several decades, is yet to join the ranks of high income economies. The ability or inability of these states to do so will perhaps become apparent by the middle of the next decade. States in this region are trying to engage in activities across the entire spectrum, from low cost skill manufacturing to high end manufacturing and skilled services. These range from apparel to cars, from mobile phone assembly to semiconductor units, and from IT services to chip design. Both market forces are government policy exercised through PLIs and reinforcing the manufacturing and services ecosystem in these regions. Even in the primary sector, these states are more engaged in higher value added activities like dairy and poultry. With more job opportunities in the region's labor across skill spectrum, capital should continue to flow to these states. This could help keep wages under check and ensure steady access to capital, possibly allowing them to maintain their competitiveness. Constraints such as falling labor force, rising wages, and absence of skilled workers, and capital accumulation could possibly be less of a hindrance for these states. The question then is, can these states also acquire or develop the technological capabilities needed to expand further into higher value added activities? Can they also keep their export engines humming, or will their growth be constrained by central or state government policies? At the same time, the vast majority of states where the bulk of the country population resides, moving up from low income category like Bihar, with an average income of $729 or moving towards upper middle income levels like Chhattisgarh 1700, West Bengal 1800, and Odisha 1900 will be a difficult journey. In fact, backing both a strong manufacturing and modern service base, the challenge from them is perhaps of a much greater magnitude. While some states do benefit from minerals, what beyond that? It is rather odd that considering the ruling dispensation draws its political strength from most of these parts of the country, it has not made more concerted attempt to boost their economic fortunes. Redistribution is not a growth strategy. Redistribution is not a growth strategy. Thus, India's development challenge, as some have argued, exists at two levels. One, to ensure that the western and southern states do not get trapped in the middle income trap, and two, to see to it that poor states grow rapidly. India will necessarily involve operating across the entire smile curve, engaging in both low and high value added activities. To that end, the question is what policies will center adopt? Will it move towards freer trade or continue to prefer some form of protectionism? Will it press on with the national champion strategy, making it less likely for many more flowers to bloom? Will it build and nurture the institutions that are required to propel growth? And last, will politics limit economic possibilities? In a country where political power is divorced from economic power, where more wealthy regions seemingly have less say over the union government's economic policies, is prosperity more or less likely? Voice matters. Some have pointed to the fact that the Indian economy has grown at an average of around 6% over the past 3 decades, and that this growth has been largely maintained despite the ups and downs of the economy under both coalition and majority governments in the face of a global financial crisis and a pandemic. However, it is naive to assume that even this trend can be sustained for the next 2 decades without well thought out policies, let alone 8% growth trajectory needed to achieve high income status. The history of the world is jittered with examples of countries whose growth has stalled, whose economies have failed to make transition from upper middle income to high income status, and this calls for a careful evaluation of economic policy. After all, getting caught in the middle income trap is a failure of governance. Will it move towards freer trade or continue to prefer some form of protectionism? Will it press toward with the national champion strategy or making it less likely for more flowers to bloom? Will it build and nurture the institutions that are required to propel growth? And will politics limit economic possibilities in a country where political power is divorced from economic power? Where the more wealthy regions seemingly have less say over union government's economic policies, is prosperity more or less likely? Voice matters. Some have pointed to the fact that Indian economy has grown at an average of around 6% over the past 3 decades, and that this growth has largely maintained despite the ups and downs of the economy under the both coalition and majority government in the face of global financial crisis and a pandemic. However, it is naive to assume that even this trend can be sustained for the next 2 decades without well thought out policies, let alone an 8% growth trajectory needed to achieve higher income status. The history of the world is jittered with examples of countries whose growth has stalled, whose economies have failed to make a transition from upper middle income to higher income status. This calls for a careful evaluation of economic policy. After all, getting caught in the middle income trap is a failure of governance. Over the last few days, Ranveer Alhabadia's case has been capturing public imagination. Multiple articles have been written on what Beer Bicep guy said on the YouTube show. Opinion is divided about how such comment should be dealt with by the state. Yet, even the articles defending his right to free speech often contain a caveat that the writer personally found the comments offensive. It seems that right to free speech has to be preceded by an apology for asking for it. It seems that Supreme Court thought it should do the same when Allahabad moved the court seeking protection from multiple FIRs against him in various states. The court did grant him protection, but with conditions. As reported in the papers, court orally expressed its gratuitous moral disapproval about the comments. Statements made by the judges in court are not binding, of course, but in this day and age, surely the judges are aware that what they can say will be widely reported. This calls for a certain amount of circumspection, but that is one article for another day. While expressing its view that the comments cause shame to society, the courts also proceeded to impose an extremely unusual condition. It restrained Allahabad from airing any show. Till the next date of hearing, it can only be wondered whether the court knew this would effectively render the YouTuber unemployed and hence possibly unable to defend himself, since engaging with the legal system cost money. But that is not at least of the issues with the order, which is problematic for at least two other reasons. First is its impact on the liberty of all the citizens, and second is the effect it has on the freedom of the press. Traditionally understood, the Constitution recognizes that a citizen has a right to various freedoms, including the right to free speech. Whenever the legislature or the executive threatens to infringe that right, the court functions as its guardian. Traditionally understood, Constitution recognizes the citizen has a right to various freedoms, including the right to free speech. Whenever the legislature or the executive threatens to infringe that right, the court functions as its guardian. The makers of the Constitution imagined that the might of an overbearing state could only be resisted by a powerful court coming to the aid of powerless citizens. So, an order where the court restricts free speech flips the constitutional scheme on its head. Where is the citizen to grow when her free speech is restricted by the very authority meant to protect it? Rather than being a neutral umpire in questions relating to the extent of free speech, the court has become a participant, and when the protectors turn prosecutor, the delicate balance of power between different institutions of the state fall apart. The ultimate price of this breakdown is paid by citizens through their loss of liberty. Instead of turning to the court for redress against an overbearing executive, they have to barter some of their freedom to ensure protection. Rights are surely not transactional. The loss of freedom should not be price of pursuit of liberty. Second, the order has potentially serious ramifications for the freedom of the press. It is fashionable to call YouTubers content creators, but in the cacophony of social media, it is easy to forget that there are a host of online platforms offering alternative journalism. It is these sites that offer counter narrative to the mainstream reportage. This is something that irks the government and all political parties, which is itching to control these independent voices. The court has set a dangerous precedent by passing a gag order on all future content based on an individual show that has offended some people. People are quick to take offense, and it is possible that cases will now be filed against journalists. They will seek not just the removal of the offensive articles but a halt of all future reporting. The jurisprudence of the court was always against any pre-censorship. The order has driven a coach and horses through the principle. The result will likely please the executive, taking sanction under the court's observations. It is likely to further restrict the rights of citizens. This time the citizens will have nowhere to turn because it is the court itself that has initiated the act of restricting most of all its freedoms. Given how short-lived public memory is, no doubt some other event will overtake this news in the coming weeks, and sadly, the price of this amnesia, the temporary outrage over the restriction of free speech, is a step towards normalization of censorship. A nation that can forget the treatment meted out to Munawar Faruqi on the multiple FIRs against journalists on the recurrent social media hounding of anyone saying anything contrary to the morality of the day is destined to see its freedom wither away. when the court becomes party to restricting rather than protecting free speech, the citizens of the country ought to be afraid indeed. We advise the US side not to challenge China's patience, to stop manipulating Taiwan related issues, and to cease sending incorrect signals to Taiwan independence separatist forces. A law weaponized, powering America. That's what Indians migrants at home are doing. This must inform bilateral ties under Trump. In Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, the dustman Alfred P. Doolittle, wallowing in his unemployment, holds a mirror to the middle class morality. Can't afford it, Governor, he tells the professor and colonel who are intent on reforming him. Middle class morality, says Doolittle, is just an excuse for not giving me anything. There's lots of middle class morality around going around in the social media diatribes against Indians who have entered United States illegally and are being deported in chains. Irony lies in the fact that large number of President Donald Trump supporters may welcome may well come from families that migrated to the US when they were no different from the days desperately aspirational Indians seeking entry by any means into that land of opportunity. The only difference lies in the fact that Europe colonized and populated Americas when migration was a natural phenomenon. Man and animal alike moved freely across land and sea in search of sustenance and opportunity. In the long history of humanity, the world knew no distinction between legal and illegal migrants till just over a century ago. Nation states of the 20th century ended that long history of free movement. The ongoing debate on the legality of migration is shaped by the fact that middle class India desperately seeks visa for legal migration and worries that focus on illegal migrants may not only tar the image of Indian American but also reduce opportunities for legal migration. Everyone wants a US visa, no wonder the number of temples to visa gods is increasing. Beginning with Telangana's Chelkur Balaji temple, we now know of many others across India. The Indian middle class that spends money educating children to enable them to secure legal entry into the first world, as well as to the elite who use both money and power to secure visas for their children, are seeking the same future that the illegal migrants are. The only difference is that illegal migrants have only their money and their physical endurance, neither the education nor the power to secure legal entry. Two facts have been missed in much of the popular response to illegal migration. First, the deportees from the US have not broken any Indian law. Their action of entering the United States without a visa is a crime only according to US law, while their exit from India is almost always perfectly legal. It is a legal It is as legal as the exit of all tax evading elites who have left Indian shores and live comfortably in the first world and its tax havens. A second and far more important fact is that that the Americas are what they are because of human migration, legal and illegal. Over the past half century, the US economy has been powered by the talented and skilled migrants across all social classes from across East Asia, South Asia, Europe, and Africa. It is not surprising that even Donald Trump makes a distinction between talented immigrants that the US needs and those the US may no longer need. With President Trump repeatedly focusing attention on tariff differentials between the US and India and accusing India of unfair trade practices, it is time that Indian economists develop a more comprehensive estimate of the nature of economic relationship between India and the US. India sells more goods and services to the US than it imports from the US, but India exports more brains and skills to the US than it secures from the US in the shape of access to new technologies. Millions of Indians have been powering the US economy over the past quarter century. Some do so after having crossed the border, working in the US, while others do so staying home in India and working for US corporations. The rapid growth of the so-called global capability centers is a consequence of US firms seeking to boost their global competitiveness by hiring lower-cost talent in India. It is time that Indian authorities calculate the value addition being made to the US economy both by Indians living and working in the US and those living and working in India for US companies. Rather than being defensive about our development strategy, we should draw attention to the loss of Indian economy that the Indian economy has suffered on account of the talent drain from India to the US and value addition Indian Americans have done to the US economy. This may be regarded as mere debating point, but Trump is hectoring debater and Trumpism on trade needs to be challenged on the terms that show India in a better light. In fact, India needs to put forward a more robust defense of its trade and industrial policies, but also in order to push back on the US at an attempt to use its complaints against India to push for increased defense sales. Bridging a trade deficit through normal trading channels is fundamentally different from bridging it through different sales. Indeed, India's present policy is one of reducing our external strategic dependence through the policy of Atmanirbharta in defense. Indeed, India's present policy is one of reducing our external strategic dependence through the policy of Atmanirbharta in defense. If the government is serious about this agenda, then it should not allow differences in normal trade relations to influence strategic options in defense relations. In the recent past, there have been tendency to link India-US defense relations cooperation is a misnomer given that this is essentially a sales relationship with normal trade relations and cooperation in other fields. Trump has made no secret of his intent to make America great again. With America First policy, India should have no quarrel with that as long as his policies do not hurt Indian national interest. It is incumbent on Indian political leadership that they make this very clear. A win-win relationship between the US and India is what successive governments have tried to pursue over the past quarter century. President Trump seeks a win-lose relationship. He wins, we lose, a zero-sum game. India must firmly reject it rather than obfuscate and pretend that all is well. A law weaponized no objection provision that defeats the purpose of Special Marriage Act. February, often seen as a month of love, commenced. On a sad note, this year, a law-abiding couple had to pay a big cost at the seat of justice for legally solemnizing their love while gift targets are overflowing with material manifestations of love. Two adult citizens had their lives in jeopardy merely because they had refused to follow the legal prescription registering their marriage. This couple from Bhopal had approached a local court in the city to notify their intention to marry as per the requisite of the Special Marriage Act 1954, but their stepping stone to a life of togetherness was ruthlessly interrupted by a group of vigilantes who stormed into the court complex and beat the male partner up. All this because this was an interfaith couple, a Muslim man and a Hindu woman. The irony of the situation is that the law that brought them to the court on the day was enacted to enable interfaith couples to marry lawfully. Unfortunately, 7 decades since it came into force, instead of safeguarding the rights of interfaith couples, the requisites of the law have emerged as the cause of harm. Mired in the blanket term love jihad, almost every Muslim Hindu marriage is assumed to be an act of religious coercion or indoctrination. Self declared vanguards of the religion often infantilize consenting adults. The visuals from Bhopal tragically remind that neither the bounds of the court nor the law of the land offer any shelter from the wrath of moral police. The statement of objects and reasons of the Act lays down that core principles behind the enactment of the law was to decolonize and the old law on marriage and enable couples who have married under varied customs of India to receive legal certification under secular law. In the aftermath of partition, this was indeed an enabling act that empowered love to transcend religious barriers. The act facilitates any man above the age of 21 and any women above the 18 years age of 18 years who didn't have the other any other living spouses and are capable of consenting to marriage and legally solemnize their marriage. But this act demands a peculiar formality. The intending couples must give notice to their relevant marriage registrar a month before the desired date of marriage, and within this period anyone can raise objections. While the caveats to such notice must be grounded on either partner's ineligibility to marry, the danger this publicly accessible notice brews is that the couple's privacy is severely compromised. As in the current case, whoever wishes to cause backlash need not raise lawful objection. The Act licenses any objection. It could be a personal vendetta, vested interest, or in Bhopal's case, social bias, a tip off, effectively a leak of couple's personal data from the marriage registrar's office to the vigilante group, led to the horrific incident. In the landmark judgment of the case Puttoswamy versus Union of India, Supreme Court had ordained the right to privacy as an inalienable right of to human existence. It stated privacy recognizes the ability of individuals to control vital aspects of their life and safeguards the autonomy exercised by them in decisions of personal intimacies, matters of home and marriage, and sanctity of family life and sexual orientation, all of which are at the core of privacy. Authorities have reportedly said that the woman claimed she was being forced to convert to Islam, that is, breach of her autonomy. If conversation was in fact a condition of the marriage, then hers was not a qualified consent in the first place. But when both parties willingly notify the intention to marry, other parties have no business to intervene. It seems that Section 7 of the Special Marriage Act, which invites objections to the marriage from one and all, is being weaponized in times of religious harmony. Section 7 of the Special Marriage Act, which invites objections. Section 7 of the Special Marriage Act, which invites objections. The Tur Urad cultivators require financial and scientific support like that given to the counterparts who grow chana and moong. Pulses need priority. Tur Urad cultivators require financial and scientific support like that given to their counterparts who grow chana and moong. Food and Consumer Affairs Minister Prahlad Joshi had said that the center may stop duty-free imports of yellow peas after February. This comes even as Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, in her latest budget, announced a six-year mission for Atmanirbharta, self-reliance, and six-year mission for Atmanirbharta and Pulses. Six-year mission for Atmanirbharta and Pulses, with a special focus on Tur, Urad, and Masoor. Tur, Urad, and Masoor, pigeon pea, black gram, and red lentil. Tur, pigeon pea, urad, black gram, and Masoor red lentil. Tur, pigeon pea, urad, black gram, and Masoor red lentil. Tur, pigeon pea, urad, black gram, and Masoor red lentil. It also comes at a time when India's pulses imports at $3.28 billion during November 24 were 56.6% higher than for the corresponding period of the previous year and are set to cross $5 billion in the 2024-25 fiscal. The domestic crops was poor last year because drought in Maharashtra and Karnataka, despite a spike Despite a spike, the domestic crop was poor last year because drought in Maharashtra and Karnataka, leading a spike in consumer prices. But will retail prices inflation easing 2.6% in January from double-digit levels through much of last year? The center probably does not feel the need to import much now. India incidentally achieved some degree of self-reliance in pulses, especially from 2018, 22, 23. The period saw significant drop in imports, particularly of mutton and chana chickpea. This was enabled by increased domestic production, mainly of chana and moong green gram, where scientists bred shorter duration varieties requiring irrigation at most. Shorter duration, one irrigation at most. In moong, farmers are today taking as many as four crops a year. In moong, farmers are taking as many as four crops a year thanks to varieties that are short duration as well as photothermoinsensitive, making them amenable to grow any day, anywhere. Modi government has helped through some concerted efforts at the minimum support price based procurement of chana and moong. This is definitely a case to extend the success story into other pulses, more so in Tur and Urad. That for that primacy has to be accorded to breeding. The existing Tur varieties have a duration of 60 to 160 to 180 days. Farmers need varieties that mature in 120 to 130 days and can be mechanically harvested and resistant to insects and diseases. Pulses are largely cultivated in land prone to moisture stress, while there is recognition of being a source of protein less water guzzling than rice, sugarcane, or wheat, and also harboring rhizobium bacteria that fix atmospheric nitrogen. Pulses remain victims of policy ambiguity. Tur is now selling below its MSP. It could be the same with chana when the new crop, likely the bumper one, is harvested in 1 month's time. Pulses growers lack the one thing that rice, wheat, sugarcane farmers have: assurance of their crop being procured at MSP. They deserve as much, if not more. Addressing ragging calls for unlearning prejudices, breaking the cycle between today's victim and tomorrow's perpetrator. First generation college goer from Assam whose IIT dream ended as an unresolved tragedy on campus, a young doctor from Bhil Tadvi community who died by suicide following the alleged caste-based harassment, and these are the two of the 78 deaths on campus between January 2012 and October 23. The very real consequences of dark undertows of campus life ragging. In 2009, setting up guidelines to combat ragging in educational institutions, Supreme Court had called for strict monitoring for bullying on campuses. The UGC had instituted dedicated helpline, and the UGC chief has flagged opera- uh, weak enforcement of regulations. As the recent instance of ragging at the government nursing college has shown, it is rarity a right of initiation, a more weapon of intimidation. Ragging is about power and control, humiliation and oppression, spillover of violence and rage, woven into an architecture of daily life. Campuses need to understand and address this to meet the very promise of education, a safe space of learning, growth, and equality for all. We must use time as a tool, not as a couch. Food inflation outlook pressures likely to witness significant easing. RBI Governor beyond SRTU's 30,000 crore losses in FY22 freebies, low fleet utilization, high fuel cost, state transport, and in next 5 years, Adani Group plans to invest 30,000 crore in Kerala. Insurance eyes premium hike amid rising Delhi pollution. India's composite flash PMI rises for the first time after 3 quarters. Japanese panel draws a plan for Tesla to invest in Nissan report. RBI proposes to scrap loan prepayment levy. US objects to calling Russia's aggressor. G7 statement on Ukraine invasion. Netanyahu slams release of wrong body. Hamas pledges probe. Stagnating growth, suffering industries, economy in focus as Germany sets for polls. US away, India says worked with China to preserve G20. Need leaders who understand global mindset with Indian mind, says Prime Minister. US aid, MEA says deeply disturbing, being looked at by ministries and agencies. Terming US President's claim of $21 million allocation to India for voter turnout is very deeply troubling, the Ministry of External Affairs said. This has led to concerns about foreign interference in India's internal matters. Responding to a question about Indian Express report Friday that $21 million was sanctioned for Bangladesh and not India, MEA spokesperson said there are many departments and agencies in India that work with USAID. All these ministries and agencies are looking at this right now. Crackdown to transport convoys, a new security plan for Manipur with president rule. Manipur, roiled by ethnic violence, is headed for a paradigm shift in its approach to security. Has learned that several measures are initiated: crackdown on militias, recovery of arms, removal of illegal checkpoints, ferrying of peoples and goods. Ayushman Bharat plan for Delhi, 1 lakh beneficiaries in the first 30 days. ED raids Mohali's home of the suspect Canada's biggest gold heist. Special holding area, no entry without tickets. New measures at the Delhi railway station. Interfaith couple who went to register marriage roughed up in court. Police say will probe role of lawyers. Bar Association rejects allegation. RSS like a grand banyan tree inspired lakhs for me to live for the country. Prime Minister. So that's all for today. See you in the next one. We must use time as a tool, not as a couch. John F. Kennedy.